The Wild Swans. Far away, where the swallows fly when winter comes on, lived a king who had 11 sons and 1 daughter named Eliza. The 11 brothers were princes, and each went to school with a star on his breast and his sword by his side. They wrote with pencils of diamond upon slates of gold, and learned by heart just as well as they read. One could see directly that they were princes. Their sister, Eliza, sat upon a little stool made of glass, and had a picture book which had been bought for the value of half a kingdom. Oh, the children were particularly well off, but it was not always to remain so. Their father, who was king of the whole country, married a bad queen who did not love the poor children at all. On the very first day, they could notice it. In the whole palace, there were great festivities, and the children were playing at receiving guests. But instead of these children receiving, as they had been accustomed to do, all the spare cake and all the baked apples, they only had some sand given them in a teacup, and were told that those were something good. The next week, the queen took the little sister Eliza into the country, to a peasant and his wife. A short time had elapsed before she told the king many falsehoods about the princes. "Fly out into the field and get your own living," said the wicked queen. "Fly like birds, but without a voice." But she could not make it so bad for them as she intended. For they became 11 magnificent wild swans. With a strange shriek, they flew out of the palace windows, far over the park, and into the wood. It was quite early when they came by the place where their sister Eliza lay asleep in the peasant's room. Here they hovered over the roof, turned their long necks, and flapped their wings. But no one heard or saw it. They were obliged to fly on, high up towards the clouds, far away into the wide world. There they flew into a great, dark wood, which stretched all the way to the shore. Poor little Eliza stood in the peasant's house and played with a green leaf, for she had no other playthings. And she pricked a hole in the leaf, and looked through it up at the sun. And it seemed to her that she saw her brothers' clear eyes. Each time the sun shone upon her cheeks, she thought of all the kisses they had given her. Each day passed just like the one before. When the wind swept through the great rose hedges outside the house, it seemed to whisper to them, "What can be more beautiful than you?" But the roses shook their heads and answered, "Eliza." And when the old woman sat in front of her door on Sunday and read in her hymn book, the wind turned the leaves and said to the book, "Who can be more pious than you?" The hymn book said, "Eliza." And what the rose bushes and the hymn book said was the simple truth. When she was 15 years old, she returned home. And when the queen saw how beautiful she was, she became spiteful and filled with hatred towards her. She would have been glad to change her into a wild swan like her brothers. But she did not dare to do so at once, because the king wished to see his daughter. Early in the morning, the queen went into the bath, which was built of marble and decked with soft cushions and the most splendid tapestry. And she took 3 toads and kissed them, and said to the first, "Sit upon Eliza's head when she comes into the bath, that she may become as stupid as you. Seat yourself upon her forehead," she said to the second, "that she may become as sluggish as you, and her father may not know her. Rest on her heart," she whispered to the third, "that she may receive an evil mind and suffer pain from it." Then she put the toads into the clear water, which at once assumed a green color. And calling Eliza, caused her to undress and step into the water. And while Eliza dived, one of the toads sat upon her hair, and the second on her forehead, and the third on her heart. But she did not seem to notice it. And as soon as she rose, 3 red poppies were floating in the water. If the creatures had not been poisonous, and if the witch had not kissed them, they would have been changed into red roses. But at any rate, they became flowers, because they had rested on the girl's head and forehead and heart. She was too good and innocent for sorcery to have power over her. When the wicked queen saw that, she rubbed Eliza with walnut juice, so that the girl became dark brown, and smeared an evil-smelling ointment on her face, and let her beautiful hair tangled. It was quite impossible to recognize the pretty Eliza. When her father saw her, he was much shocked and declared this was not his daughter. No one but the yard dog and the swallows would recognize her. But they were humble animals who had nothing to say in the matter. Then poor Eliza wept and thought of her 11 brothers, who were all away. Sorrowfully, she crept out of the castle and walked all day over field and moor, till she came into the great wood. She had no idea where she was going. Only she felt very downcast and longed for her brothers. They had certainly been, like herself, thrust forth into the world, and she would seek for them and find them. She had been only a short time in the wood when the night fell. She quite lost the path. Therefore, she lay down upon the soft moss, said her evening prayer, and leaned her head against the stump of a tree. Deep silence reigned around. The air was mild, and in the grass and in the moss gleamed hundreds of glowworms, like green fire. When she lightly touched one of the twigs with her hand, the glittering insects fell down upon her like shooting stars. The whole night long she dreamed of her brothers. They were children again, playing together, writing with their diamond pencils upon their golden slates, and looking at the beautiful picture book which had cost half a kingdom. But on the slates they were not writing, as they had been accustomed to do, lines and letters. But the brave deed they had done, and all they had seen and experienced. And the picture book was alive. The birds sang, and the people went out of the book and spoke with Eliza and her brothers. But when the leaf was turned, they leaped back again directly. When she awoke, the sun was already high overhead. She could certainly not see it, for the lofty trees spread out their branches far and dense above her. But the rays played above them like a gauzy veil. There was a fragrance from the fresh verdure, and the birds almost perched upon her shoulders. She heard the plashing of water, It was from a number of springs, all flowing into a lake, which had the most delightful sandy bottom. It was surrounded by thick, growing bushes. But at one part the stags had made a large opening. And here Eliza went down to the water. The lake was so clear that if the wind had not stirred the branches and the bushes so that they moved, one would have thought they were painted on the depths of the lake. So sharply was every leaf mirrored, whether the sun shone through it or whether it lay in shadow. When Eliza saw her own face, she was quite terrified. So brown and ugly was she. But when she wetted her little hand and rubbed her eyes and her forehead, the white skin gleamed forth again. Then she undressed and went down into the fresh water. A more beautiful royal girl than she was could not be found in the world. And when she had dressed herself again and plaited her long hair, she went to the bubbling spring, drank out of her hollow hand, and then wandered farther into the wood, without knowing where she went. She thought about her dear brothers, and thought that heaven would certainly not forsake her. It is God who made the wild apples grow to satisfy the hungry. He showed her a wild apple tree, with the boughs bending under the weight of the fruit. Here she ate her midday meal, placed props under the boughs, and then went into the darkest part of the forest. There it was so still that she could hear her own footsteps, as well as the rustling of every withered leaf which bent under her feet. Not one bird was to be seen. Not one ray of sunlight could find its way through the great dark boughs of the trees. The lofty trunks stood so close together that when she looked before her, it appeared as though she were surrounded by sets of pawlings, one behind the other. Oh, here was a solitude such as she had never before known. The night came on quite dark. Not a single glowworm now gleamed in the grass. Sorrowfully, she lay down to sleep. Then it seemed to her as if the branches of the trees parted above her head. And mild eyes of angels looked down upon her from on high. When the morning came, she did not know if it had really been so or if she had dreamed it. She went a few steps forward, and then she met an old woman with berries in her basket. And the old woman gave her a few of them. Eliza asked the dame if she had not seen 11 princes riding through the wood. "No," replied the old woman. "But yesterday I saw 11 swans swimming in a river nearby, with golden crowns on their heads." And she led Eliza a short distance farther to a declivity. And at the foot of the slope, a little river wound its way. The trees on its margin stretched their long, leafy branches across towards each other, and where their natural growth would not allow them to come together, the roots had been torn out of the ground and hung, intertwined with the branches, over the water. Eliza said farewell to the old woman and went along the river to the place where the stream flowed out to the great open ocean. The whole glorious ocean lay before the young girl's eyes, but not one sail appeared on its surface, and not a boat was to be seen. How was she to proceed? She looked at the innumerable little pebbles on the shore. The water had worn them all round. Glass, ironstones, everything that was there had received its shape from the water, which was much softer than even her delicate hand. It rolls on unweariedly, and thus what is hard becomes smooth. I will be just as unwearied. Thanks for your wisdom, you clear rolling waves. My heart tells me that one day you will lead me to my dear brothers. On the foam-covered seagrass lay 11 white swan feathers, which she collected into a bunch. Drops of water were upon them. Whether they were dewdrops or tears, nobody could tell. Solitary it was there on the strand, but she did not feel it, for the sea offered continual variations. More in a few hours than the lovely lakes can display in a whole year. Then a great black cloud came. It seemed as if the sea would say, "I can look angry too." And then the wind blew, and the waves turned their white side out. But when the clouds gleamed red, and the winds slept, the sea looked like a rose leaf. Sometimes it became green, sometimes white. But however calmly it rested, there was still a slight motion on the shore. The water rose gently, like the breast of a sleeping child. When the sun was just about to set, Eliza saw 11 wild swans with crowns on their heads, flying towards the land. They swept along one after the other, so that they looked like a long white band. Then Eliza ascended the slope and hid herself behind a shrub. The swans alighted near her and flapped their great white wings. As soon as the sun had disappeared beneath the water, the swan's feathers fell off, and 11 handsome princes, Eliza's brothers, stood there. She uttered a loud cry, for although they were greatly altered, she knew and felt that it must be them. And she sprang into their arms and called them by name. And the princes felt supremely happy when they saw their little sister again. And they knew her, though she was now tall and beautiful. They smiled and wept, and soon they understood how cruel their stepmother had been to all of them. "We brothers," said the eldest, "fly about as wild swans as long as the sun is in the sky. But directly it sinks down, we assume our human form again. Therefore, we must always take care that we have a resting place for our feet when the sun sets. For if at that moment we were flying up towards the clouds, we should sink down into the deep as men. We do not dwell here. There lies a land just as fair as this, beyond the sea. But the way thither is long. We must cross the vast ocean. And on our path there is no island where we could pass the night, only a little rock stands forth in the midst of the waves. It is but just large enough that we can rest upon it close to each other. If the sea is rough, the foam spurts far over us. But we thank God for the rock. There we pass the night in our human form. But for this rock, we could never visit our beloved native land. For we require 2 of the longest days in the year for our journey. Only once in each year is it granted to us to visit our home. For 11 days we may stay here and fly over the great wood, from whence we can see the palace in which we were born, and in which our father lives, and the high church tower, beneath whose shade our mother lies buried. Here it seems to us as though the bushes and trees were our relatives. Here the wild horses career across the steppe, as we have seen them do in our childhood. Here the charcoal burner sings the old songs to which we danced as children. Here is our fatherland. Hither we feel ourselves drawn, and here we have found you, our dear little sister. 2 days more we may stay here. Then we must away across the sea to a glorious land, but which is not our native land. How can we bear you away with us? We have neither ship nor boat. In what way can I release you? Asked the sister. And they conversed nearly the whole night, only slumbering for a few hours. She was awakened by the rustling of the swan's wings above her head. Her brothers were again enchanted, and they flew in wide circles, and at last far away. But one of them, the youngest, remained behind, and the swan laid his head in her lap, and she stroked his wings. And the whole day they remained together. Towards evening, the others came back, and when the sun had gone down, they stood there in their own shapes. Tomorrow we fly far away from here, and cannot come back until a whole year had gone by. But we cannot leave you thus. Have you courage to come with us? My arm is strong enough to carry you in the wood. And should not all our wings be strong enough to fly with you over the sea? "Yes, take me with you," said Eliza. The whole night they occupied themselves with plaiting a net. On a net Eliza lay down, and when the sun rose and her brothers were changed into wild swans, they seized the net with their beaks and flew high with their beloved sister, who was still asleep, high up towards the clouds. The sunbeams fell exactly upon her face, so one of the swans flew over her head, that his broad wings might overshadow her. They were far away from the shore when Eliza awoke. She was still dreaming. So strange did it appear to her to be carried high through the air and over the sea. By her side lay a branch with beautiful, ripe berries, and a bundle of sweet-tasting roots. The youngest of the brothers had collected them and placed them there for her. She smiled at him thankfully, for she recognized him. It was who flew over her and shaded her with his wings. They were so high that the first ship they described beneath them seemed like a white seagull lying upon the waters. A great cloud stood behind them. It was a perfect mountain, and upon it Eliza saw her own shadow and those of the 11 swans. There they flew on, gigantic in size. Here was a picture, a more splendid one than she had ever yet seen. But as the sun rose higher and the cloud was left farther behind them, the floating, shadowy images vanished. The whole day they flew onward through the air like a whirring arrow. But their flight was slower than it was wont to be, for they had their sister to carry. Bad weather came on. The evening drew near. Eliza looked anxiously at the setting sun, for the lonely rock in the ocean could not be seen. It seemed to her as if the swans beat the air more strongly with their wings. Alas, she was the cause that they did not advance fast enough. When the sun went down, they must become men and fall into the sea and drown. Then she prayed a prayer from the depths of her heart, but still she could descry no rock. The dark clouds came nearer in a great, black, threatening wave, rolling forward like a mass of lead, and the lightning bolt flashed after another. Now the sun just touched the margin of the sea. Eliza's heart trembled. Then the swans darted downward, so swiftly that she thought they were falling. But they paused again. The sun was half hidden below the water. And now, for the first time, she saw the little rock beneath her. And it looked no larger than a seal might look, thrusting his head forth from the water. The sun sank very fast. At last it appeared only like a star. And then her foot touched the firm land. The sun was extinguished like the last spark in a piece of burned paper. Her brothers were standing around her, arm in arm. But there was not more than just enough room for her and for them. The sea beat against the rock and went over her like small rain. The sky glowed in ever-blazing fire, and peal on peal the thunder rolled. But sister and brothers held each other by the hand and sang hymn, from which they gained solace and courage. At daybreak, the air was pure and calm. As soon as the sun rose, the swans flew away with Eliza from the island. The sea still ran high, and when they soared up aloft, the white foam looked like millions of white swans swimming upon the water. When the sun mounted higher, Eliza saw half floating in the air a mountainous country with shining masses of ice on its hills. And in the midst of it rose a castle, apparently a mile long, with row above row of elegant columns, while below waved the palm woods and bright flowers as large as mill wheels. She asked if this was the country to which they were bound. But the swans shook their heads, for what she beheld was the gorgeous, ever-changing palace of Fata Morgana. And into this they might bring no human being. As Eliza gazed at it, mountains, woods, and castle collapsed, and 20 proud churches, all nearly alike, with high towers and arched windows, stood beneath them. She fancied she heard the organs sounding, but it was the sea she heard. When she was quite near the churches, they changed to a fleet sailing beneath her. But when she looked down, it was only a sea mist gliding over the ocean. Thus things change constantly before her eyes. Then, at last, she saw the real land which they were heading for. There arose the most glorious blue mountains, with cedar forests, cities, and palaces. Long before the sun set, she sat on the rock in front of a great cave, overgrown with delicate, green, trailing plants, looking like embroidered tapestries. Now we shall see what you will dream of here tonight, said the youngest brother, and he showed her to her bedchamber. Heaven grant that I may dream of a way to release you, she replied. And this thought possessed her mightily, and she prayed ardently for help. Yes, even in her sleep, she continued to pray. It seemed to her as if she were flying high in the air to the cloudy palace of Fata Morgana, and the fairy came out to greet her, beautiful and radiant. And yet the fairy was quite like the old woman who had given her the berries in the wood, and had told her the swans with golden crowns on their heads. Your brothers can be released, said she. But have you courage and perseverance? Certainly, water is softer than your delicate hands, and yet it reshaped the stones. But it does not feel the pain that your fingers will feel. It has no heart, and does not suffer the agony and torment you will have to endure. Do you see the stinging nettles which I hold in my hand? Many of the same kind grow around the cave in which you sleep. Those only, and those that grow upon churchyard graves, are serviceable. Mark this well. Those you must pluck, though they will burn your hands into blisters. Break these nettles to pieces with your feet, and you will have flax. Of this you must plait and weave 11 shirts of mail with long sleeves. Throw these over the 11 swans, and the charm will be broken. But recollect well. From the moment you begin this work until it is finished, even though it should take years to accomplish, You must not speak. The first word you utter will pierce your brother's hearts like a deadly dagger. Their lives hang on your tongue. Remember all this. And she touched her hand with the nettle. It was like a blazing fire, and Eliza woke with the smart. It was in broad daylight, and close by the spot where she had slept lay a nettle like the one she had seen in her dream. She fell upon her knees and prayed gratefully, and went forth from the cave to begin her work. With her delicate hands she groped among the ugly nettles. These stung like fire, burning great blisters on her arms and hands. But she would bear it gladly if she could only release her dear brothers. Then she bruised every nettle with her bare feet and plaited the green flax. When the sun had set, her brothers came, and they were frightened when they found her dumb. They thought it was some new sorcery of their wicked stepmothers. But when they saw her hands, they understood what she was doing for their sake, and the youngest brother wept. And where his tears dropped, she felt no more pain, and the burning blisters vanished. She passed the night at her task, for she could not sleep till she had delivered her dear brothers. The whole of the following day, while the swans were away, she sat in solitude. But never had time flown so quickly with her as now. One shirt of mail was already finished, and now she began the second. Then a hunting horn sounded among the hills, and she was struck with fear. The noise came nearer and nearer. She heard the barking dogs, and timidly she fled into the cave. Bound into a bundle the nettles she had collected and prepared, and sat upon the bundle. Immediately a great dog came bounding out of the thicket. And then another, and another. They barked loudly, ran back, and then came again. Only a few minutes had gone before all the huntsmen stood before the cave, and the handsomest of them was the king of the country. He came forward to Eliza, for he had never seen a more beautiful maiden. "How did you come here, you delightful child?" he asked. Eliza shook her head, for she might not speak. It would cost her brothers their deliverance and their lives. And she hid her hands under her apron, so that the king might not see what she was suffering. "Come with me," said he. You cannot stop here. If you are as good as you are beautiful, I will dress you in velvet and silk, and place the golden crown on your head. And you shall dwell in my richest castle and rule." And then he lifted her on his horse. She wept and wrung her hands. But the king said, "I only wish for your happiness. Someday you will thank me for this." And then he galloped away among the mountains with her on his horse, and the hunters galloped at their heels. When the sun went down, the fair regal city lay before them, with its churches and cupolas. And the king led her into the castle, where great fountains plashed in the vast marble halls, and where walls and ceilings were covered with resplendent pictures. But she had no eyes for all this. She only wept and mourned. Passively, she let the women put royal robes upon her, and weave pearls in her hair, and draw dainty gloves over her blistered fingers. When she stood there in full array, she was dazzlingly beautiful, so that the court bowed deeper than ever. And the king chose her for his bride. Although the archbishop shook his head and whispered that the beauteous forest maid was surely a witch who dazzled the eyes and led astray the heart of the king. But the king gave no ear to this, but ordered that the music should sound, and the costliest dishes should be served, and the most beautiful maidens should dance before them. And she was led through fragrant gardens into gorgeous halls. But never a smile crossed her lips or shone in her eyes. There she stood, a picture of grief. Then the king opened a little chamber close by where she was to sleep. This chamber was decked with splendid green tapestry, and completely resembled the cave in which she had been. On the floor lay the bundle of flax which she had prepared from the nettles, and under the ceiling hung the shirt of mail she had completed. All these things one of the huntsmen had brought with him as a kind of curiosities. "Here you may dream yourself back in your former home," said the king. "Here is the work which occupied you there. And now, in the midst of all your splendor, it will amuse you to think of that time." When Eliza saw this that lay so near her heart, a smile played round her mouth, and the blood came back to her cheeks. She thought of her brother's deliverance, and kissed the king's hand, and he pressed her to his heart, and caused the marriage feast to be announced by all the church bells. The beautiful mute girl out of the wood became queen of the country. Then the archbishop whispered evil words into the king's ear. But they did not sink into the king's heart. The wedding was to take place. The archbishop himself was obliged to place the crown on her head, and with wicked spite he pressed the narrow circlet so tightly upon her forehead that it pained her. But a heavier ring lay close around her heart, sorrow for her brothers. She did not feel the bodily pain. Her mouth was dumb, for a single word would cost her brothers their lives. But her eyes glowed with love for the kind, handsome king, who did everything to rejoice her. She loved him with her whole heart, more and more every day. If she had been able to confide in him and to tell him of her grief, but she was obliged to be mute and to finish her task in silence. Therefore, at night she crept away from his side and went quietly into the little chamber which was adorned like the cave, and wove one shirt of mail after another. But when she began the 7th, she had no flax left. She knew that in the churchyard nettles were growing that she could use. But she must pluck them herself. And how was she to go out there? Oh, what is the pain in my fingers to the torment my heart endures, thought she. I must attempt it, and help will not be denied me. With a trembling heart, as though she were about to commit an evil deed, she crept into the garden in the moonlight night, and went through the avenues and through the deserted streets to the churchyard. There, on one of the broadest tombstones, she saw sitting a group of hideous lamias. These hideous witches took off their ragged garments, as if they were going to bathe. Then, with their skinny fingers, they clawed open the fresh graves. Eliza was obliged to pass close by them, and they fastened their evil glances upon her. But she recited a prayer, and gathered up the burning nettles flatly, and carried them into the castle. Only one person had seen her, and that was the archbishop. He was awake while others slept. Now he felt sure his opinion was correct, that all was not as it should be with the queen. She was a witch, and thus she had bewitched the king and the whole people. In secret, he told the king what he had seen and what he feared. And when the harsh words fell from his tongue, the carved images of saints in the cathedral shook their heads, as though they could have said, "It is not so. Eliza is innocent." But the archbishop interpreted this differently. He thought they were bearing witness against her and shaking their heads at her sinfulness. Then 2 heavy tears rolled down the king's cheeks. He went home with doubt in his heart, and at night pretended to be asleep. But no peaceful sleep came to his eyes, for he noticed that Eliza got up. Every night she did this, and each time he followed her silently and saw how she disappeared from her chamber. From day to day, his countenance became darker. Eliza saw it, but did not understand the reason. But it worried her. Her hot tears flowed upon the royal velvet and purple. They lay there like glittering diamonds. And all who saw the splendor wished they were the queen's. In the meantime, she had almost finished her work. Only 1 shirt of mail was still to be completed. But she had no flax left, and not a single nettle. Once more, for the last time, she must go to the churchyard, only to pluck a few handfuls. She thought with terror of this solitary wandering and of the horrible lamias. But her will was firm as her faith in Providence. Eliza went on, but the king and the archbishop followed her. They saw her vanish into the churchyard through the wicket gate. And when they drew near, the lamias were sitting upon the gravestones as Eliza had seen them. And the king turned aside, for he fancied her among them, whose head had rested on his breast that very evening. "The people must judge her," said he. And the people condemned her to suffer death by fire. Out of the gorgeous regal halls she was led into a dark, damp cell, where the wind whistled through the grating window. Instead of velvet and silk, they gave her the bundle of nettles which she had collected, and the hard burning coats of mail which she had woven were to be her coverlet. But nothing could have been given her that she liked better. She resumed her work and prayed. Without, the street boys were singing jeering songs about her, and not a soul comforted her with a loving word. But towards evening there came a whirring of swans' wings close by the grating. It was the youngest of her brothers. He had found his sister, and she sobbed aloud with joy, though she knew that the approaching night would probably be the last she had to live. But now the work was almost finished, and her brothers were here. Now came the archbishop to stay with her in her last hour, for he had promised the king to do so. But she shook her head, and with looks and gestures she begged him to leave, for in this night she must finish her work, or else all would be in vain. All her tears, her pain, and her sleepless nights. The archbishop withdrew, uttering evil words against her. But poor Eliza knew she was innocent, and continued her work. The little mice ran about on the floor, and dragged nettles to her feet in order to help her. And the thrush perched beside the bars of the window, and sang all night as merrily as it could, so that she might not lose courage. It was just barely daybreak. Not until an hour later would the sun come up, and the 11 brothers stood at the castle gate. They demanded to be brought before the king. That could not be, they were told, for it was still almost night. The king was asleep, and might not be disturbed. They begged, they threatened, and the sentries came. Even the king himself came out, and asked what was the meaning of this. At that moment the sun rose, and there were no princes to be seen. But 11 wild swans flew away over the castle. All the people came flocking out at the town gate, for they wanted to see the witch burned. An old horse drew the cart on which she sat. They had put upon her a garment of coarse sackcloth. Her lovely hair hung loose about her beautiful head. Her cheeks were as pale as death, and her lips moved silently, while her fingers were engaged with the green flax. Even on the way to death, she did not interrupt the work she had begun. The 10 shirts of mail lay at her feet, and she was knitting the 11th. The mob jeered her. "Look at the witch, how she mutters. She has no hymn book in her hand. There she sits with her sorcery. Tear it in 1,000 pieces." And they all surged her and wanted to tear up the shirts of mail, but she blamed no one. Then 11 wild swans came flying up and sat round about her on the cart and beat with their wings. And the mob gave way before them, terrified. "That is a sign from heaven. She is certainly innocent," whispered many. But they did not dare to say it aloud. Now the executioner seized her by the hand. Then she hastily threw the 11 shirts over the swans, and instantly 11 handsome princes stood there. But the youngest had a swan's wing instead of an arm, for a sleeve was wanting to his shirt. She had not quite finished it. "Now I may speak," she said. "I am innocent." And the people who saw what happened bowed to her as to a saint. But she sank lifeless into her brother's arms. "Yes, she is innocent," said the eldest brother. And now he told everything that had taken place. And while he spoke, a fragrance of millions of roses spread. For the grating of the cart had grown roots and shot out branches, tall and great, covered with red roses. And at the top sat a flower, white and shining, gleaming like a star. This flower the king plucked and placed in Eliza's bosom, and she awoke with peace and happiness in her heart. And all the church bells rang of themselves, and the birds came in great flocks, hovering in the sky. And back to the castle such a marriage procession took place as no king had ever seen.